Hello and welcome to Movie Buffs, a show that covers the best films of all time. I'm your host, Shani B. You can find me on all the socials at It's Me, Shani B.
And I'm your other host, Cisco from Misfit Minded Media Reviews. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Misfit_Minded, on Twitter at Rampage_Misfit, and my website, MisfitMinded.com.
And today we are talking about the 2009 film Watchmen, based on the comics from the 1980s, written by David Hayter and Alex Tse, and directed by the visionary Zack Snyder. Starring Jackie Earle Haley, Patrick Wilson, Malin Ackerman, Matthew Good, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Billy Crudup, and of course, my fave of all time, Carla Gugino, uh, who's a Zack Snyder staple. If
Yep.
you haven't, yep. If you haven't seen it, it is about an alternative reality in 1985. And after the murder of a controversial superhero called the Comedian, the active vigilante Rorschach sets out on the trail of conspiracy that will change the course of history. It's essentially a highly stylized ultraviolet
Yeah,
fantasy
what you
noir.
said, what you said.
What do you think about this movie? I got to hear what you have to say. I'm interested.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do want to just quick correction because I know people take Watchmen very seriously. But Alan Moore wrote the graphic novel.
Oh, the
So
novels. Yes.
yeah, I think though you're not wrong for crediting those names because that's a lot of backstory to get into. But Alan Moore is like very, hermit old man, doesn't want to be bothered, doesn't watch any of his adaptations, and
That
so
sounds really right.
yeah, yeah, if you watch this movie, you can kind of tell that. But
Yeah.
also, I laughed because when I watched it this time, I kind of was like looking forward to his credit like popping up, and then I remembered like, oh yeah, he doesn't allow them to use his name at all either. So maybe that's why you
Uh-huh.
didn't find it or whatever, because it just says it's really funny. It's like co-authored by, and then one of those names that you said,
Okay.
and but doesn't mention Alan Moore, but he is the author of the graphic novel. So,
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Good to
um,
know.
yeah, I guess now that that's out of the way, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the graphic novels. I have read the Watchmen. With this movie is basically a shot for shot adaptation, which we'll talk about,
Wow.
or I guess
Okay.
like panel to panel, whatever you would say it.
However you describe it.
Yeah, adaptation of it, and we can talk about some of the pros and cons of that. Um, I will say I do like the graphic novel more. I just think we talk about kind of mediums, different mediums, how they work better than others, and
Translating.
I do think in the translation there are some things that get lost, and like being too faithful to the source material can be a bad choice in some instances. So even
Doesn't
though
always work.
yeah, so even though I still really like it. I think this is. I'm not a huge Snyder fan. I don't think we've ever covered one of his films on here on the
We
show.
haven't.
So
Yeah, we
that
haven't. I
might
was very curious.
speak volumes there. But I will say that this is like the one I can tolerate. Like one of the ones I can tolerate.
That's a great word.
This and Dawn of the Dead, his Dawn of the Dead remake. And, I was thinking about like why that could be. I think a big reason for it is both of them are not written by Snyder. I think that's a huge thing that comes clutch
Very,
in these two
very good
movies.
observation. Yep.
James Gunn, his humor comes across in Dawn of the Dead very well.
Mm-hmm.
Keeps that from being a very self-serious slog, and I think that is what I rub up against in Snyder's movies. Generally, is that they're so self-serious and so dark and so like trying for this grittiness that it's like it just watches over me. I mean, like try to make Superman that, and it's just like I
Yeah.
don't this isn't the character, and I know this is like where you wanted to take this character, but ultimately just that's why his DC movies just have never worked for
They don't really.
me.
Yeah.
So but this one is interesting because it is a comic book movie. This kind of is like before all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Before even comic book movies really became the biggest pop culture phenomenon that we have today. And I think that's interesting to think about because this is kind of an anti superhero movie in a way. There is like
Yes.
this very real, they outlaw superheroes, which I was thinking a lot
Masks.
of The Incredibles, which kind of has the same exact
Yes. So much better though.
storyline. Yeah, Incredibles is like amazing. But yeah, it's like, very what it's saying about superheroes or whatever, and just society. Very nihilistic and dark movie. And I watched the ultimate cut for this, so that
Okay.
was like the first time I had seen. I was trying to give it a try. Don't think it's gonna be what I pick moving forward. Basically, again, there's so much backstory and all like we could talk about, and I know we only have 45 minutes, so I don't want to get
Keep it
into
tight.
everything. But I will say, so basically what the ultimate cut does is every time that kid that's reading the comic book on the corner,
Okay.
next to the newsstand, he in the graphic novel, they show you what he's reading. Like they go through the story of the
Oh,
black freighter. So it's
wild.
yeah. So it's again, and it's equally dark story of this guy who basically loses his mind
Okay.
out at sea. And so for the ultimate cut, they animate the the freighter story, and so there's like every time it goes to the kid reading, it'll show like portion, just like how they do it in the graphic novel. It kind of cuts to a.
Right.
And so the funniest part about that though was like, I knew that going into it, that's what they did. But like again, I was watching the credits roll at the beginning, and it said Gerard Butler, and
Gerard, no
yeah,
way.
and so I noticed that, and I was like, was Gerard Butler in Watchmen? I don't remember him being in Watchmen. And then I was kind of looking out to see like if he had like a small part or something. And then like maybe 20 minutes in, like, or like the second time they go to the freighter story, I'm like, oh, like he's narrating the story. Like
Wild.
he's the guy in the comic, like the guy who loses his mind. And I will say he does a really good job of like not like necessarily disguising his accent, but like it's not as exaggerated as you would normally.
Which is really hard
I
for him to
know.
do.
And so I was like, that's why I was like, I was impressed. And I think he did like a pretty good job. And yeah, it's basically, if you're a super fan of the graphic novels and of this movie, um, you probably would like that. It is the only way currently you can watch Watchmen in 4K. We
Mhm.
can revisit that later, like some of the 4K things that I
Okay,
noticed. But
interesting.
that's kind of unfortunate though, because I would probably just stick with the director's cut, um, over the ultimate, but
Yeah,
that's not in 4K format yet. So just
you
some
gotta go where the best quality's at.
yeah.
I respect that about you as a viewer. And, yeah,
I'm
as a
I'm a
critic.
physical media nerd like that. Like
I love
I'm the
that.
one person that care, like one of the few that cares about that kind of thing. But
We need
what
them.
did you think though? I know that I've set up a lot of things, directions we could take this in. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm only a moderate Fanny B because I want so badly to like this movie, but in the end, I always feel like really exhausted from trying my best to keep the story together for myself, and I just feel like it ends up always being too slow or too long for me. I don't like that the characters' storylines are not as weaved together as I feel like they should be on film, and that kind of goes to your point of how in a graphic novel format that is fine. It's easier to jump around. It feels
Mm-hmm.
less jarring to
Exactly.
do that,
Yeah.
but it does feel like we will leave something for so long that then returning to it, it sort of feels like there are two movies happening in this movie. And sometimes I like that, but I think it doesn't work for me here because I would rather it be about the group than sometimes about the couple and sometimes about Rorschach. Like
Well, yeah,
it's
and
a little
that's
too
what like the
disjointed for
ultimate
me.
cut. Why I wouldn't ever like revisit this format, like that version, is because like it's even slower. It's like 3.5 hours.
Fuck.
Yeah, and so it's like it's already a slow paced movie, like you're saying. It already kind of like cuts to different character point of views, and so do we need an extra story that's pretty. It's still in the same tone of like being dark, but it's just like it's such a bummer. Like the comic book story that he's
Hmm.
reading ends on a bummer, and then you go to the end of this movie, which is also a bummer.
A
And
bummer.
so I just
Yes.
like after the movie was over, I was just like, fuck. Like I just I was
It feels like
like,
shit.
I feel like I need a cigarette or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's entertaining for sure, but it's just too much. And I think that's why I really liked the series adaptation that HBO
I was
did.
gonna
I
ask you if you
really
watched
liked
that.
that. Oh, yeah.
That might be a hot take, but that might be even better than this movie adaptation
Is.
because it does its own thing. It takes the kind of the heroes and the lore and everything like that, but it also is not afraid to make creative choices and set
Yeah,
it in
interesting
America.
applications.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which I mean, this has a lot to say about America too, to be fair, but yeah, I'm with you on that. I really loved. I have it somewhere on the shelf here. The
So good. It made me
season.
be like,
Yeah,
"Shit, I need to go back and maybe rewatch it."
yeah,
Because it felt like I could understand the characters more and connect to them, and maybe that's because I had more time with them. Because I do feel like, to Zack Snyder's credit, like I do like the way that he does montages with the slow-mo and the self-serious
yeah.
darkness to it. Like he really does a great montage.
Well, he
It's
has
just it
like a
gets so
music video
gratuitous.
aesthetic. Like that's
Yes,
the way. And
yes.
so it's like I'm like you should be shooting music videos, bro, because you're so good at this. And
Maybe
then
that's where he came from.
I
Maybe
think so. I
his
think he did come
yeah.
from that. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that because whenever I think about this movie, I'm more likely, to revisit some of those montages more than this whole movie. And
Yeah.
I like somewhat recently within the last few months, someone might have posted it, I might have YouTubed it, I don't remember, but
Mhm.
just the whole Dr. Manhattan sequence is like
So good.
incredible. Like
Yep.
just like probably some of the best stuff Snyder's ever done. It's like one of my favorite parts of the book, and I just like again that's like he's literally taking it like exactly how it is from the graphic novel, and shot for shot, and it's crazy, and like that's I think I agree with what you wrote down here about like it really falls apart in like the last like 30-45 minutes. Like the pay it's just like what are we doing now? But
Yeah.
I really like the first like hour and a half is like I really
Tight.
thought they had something going, like where it's like you're going from different perspectives. Like you got Rorschach's journal, October 12th,
Yes.
1985. And then it
Yep.
switches to like Dr. Manhattan's narration, and like he has his own voice and way of telling the story. And like it's you're switching from all these different POVs of these superheroes who are all like very troubled characters, like mentally ill, straight up, like
Yes.
Rorschach,
Yep.
to like I don't know, like someone like
Really
having
idealistic.
yeah, idealistic. The comedian's a straight up like psychopath, like
Totally. Yes.
so. And then Dr. Manhattan, who's like this god who didn't ask to be this god character, but he's sort of forced in this role, and he's symbolic of American power, military power and things like that. And so I think like all that stuff is like really interesting. And it can I remember like when this came out, a lot of the immature people like, oh, this guy's blue dong's just hanging out.
It
Ugh.
was everywhere.
It was, but I'm like, but that's in the graphic
Yeah.
novel. Like it makes sense for the character. Like why would he feel like he has to dress up? Like
Right.
he doesn't have to. And
I mean, there's a lot of interesting displays of masculinity and some really like there's just a lot of negativity towards like female anything. And I do think not
I
feeling
can get
like you
into
need to
that.
cover up
Yeah,
your big swinging dick is like
yeah.
subtly a part of that. Because sure, he doesn't have to per se, but there is something about how like he has no problem feeling completely exposed at the same time. I just wish there was like more examination of things like that because I thought it was just hilarious. I was just sort of like, it's only just distracting because you don't expect to see full frontal nudity everywhere, and the fact that it's blue is what lets them get away with it so much,
Well,
which
it's
is
like
really funny.
you can make, and again, like, Snyder would go on to do a lot of these characters, but like you can make comparisons to be like Dr. Manhattan is Superman. They say that in the story,
They do.
in the movie. And you could think about that, like if you had all these powers, like would you really bother to like get dressed? And like the rules don't
Yeah,
apply to
would
you,
you care?
basically. Yeah. And
Right.
so like when he, that's one of the other great sequences, like when he's like this giant, walking across like the fields in
Yep.
Vietnam and they're like kind of bowing to his feet. It's like, yes, this guy is literally big dick energy. Maybe blue dick energy. Should we rebrand that?
Yes, he has serious blue dick energy. Yes.
That's why I wore my blue shirt today.
Yes.
But yeah, it's like the rules don't apply to him. I think Rorschach is definitely the more the Batman, guy who
Except no vibe with the ladies. So
goes out at
such a
night and just like but like I what I like about this story too, and again this is from the novel, but like I think it does come across in certain scenes, it's just like they're complicated, and I think like some of
yeah,
these
they're
superhero
flawed.
movies play it very safe, and like they're they don't go into some of those gray areas, and like Watchmen is like all gray areas, like even
Yes. I
even
mean, even into the black, I think sometimes
yeah.
for sure.
But like even like Rorschach, like when Patrick Wilson's finally like, dude, you're talking all this shit about my girl here,
Yeah,
like
you're saying some stuff. You're
yeah,
being a real jerk.
and then you expect Rorschach to be like, get over it or whatever, and he's like, I'm sorry, I am the way I am, or something along
Yeah,
those
thank you
lines.
for being a good friend.
Yeah, and you're like, oh shit, you're like, yeah, this guy does need to be in the institution somewhere. Like
Yes.
clearly needs clinical help.
It's
Um,
true. Yeah, DC I feel like is a little bit more interested in exploring the how hard it is to
yeah,
have great power. Like maybe Spider-Man in Marvel also contends with like when he has this power and like how to have moral rules. But I do think that it's like amazing that Watchmen kind of tells more of the truth. Like if superheroes did really exist, they would become megalomaniacs.
oh
Like they
yeah,
would think of themselves the way that the comedian does and the way that Rorschach does, like they would be this way.
yep.
So there's something about that too that like having to figure out how one creates any sort
Well, I
of
mean,
moral
on some
compass.
level, like this is like anyone that has gets to power has this, cops,
Mhm.
government officials. This is why, and like a lot of times they are above the law. Like they don't face prison time.
Nope.
They don't have to pay taxes. They don't like they'll get a fine and they'll pay it and it's whatever, like, and
Yeah,
then
everyone will
let's
forget.
keep breaking the law, because the rules don't apply to us, and so like I feel like that definitely comes across. I love like when Dr. Manhattan just says fuck it and just goes to Mars. Like one of the most relatable parts of the novel, and just like the way it comes across here, where that's one of my favorite lines of where he's like, I'm tired of these people, their problems. Like I'm just
Yeah.
like these humans, and I'm like, dude, as a human, totally understand. Like I wouldn't want to deal with us either.
I wish they were able to identify that like that those were where his human qualities still existed.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like his ability to feel overwhelmed at all, emotionally overwhelmed at all, should have been a hint. And I think he kind of gets that, but it is strange how he doesn't really turn around and feel like humanity is worth anything until he decides that like if a piece of shit like the comedian could have an awesome daughter, then maybe humanity is
Yeah.
worth something. And I just don't
Which I
like
don't think
love
really
that that's
works.
the turning point.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the casting. Like if we're talking about our plot holes, I don't think, and she got a lot of shit when this movie came out, so I'm not trying to pile onto that.
No.
But she just isn't great. Like she isn't great at selling that. There's no, we're talking about like depth and like different like dimensions to these characters, and I don't feel like there's a lot of that with her character. And so
Is
like,
that like in the graphic novel though? Like does she get more cuz I guess I couldn't decide if
yeah,
that was actually the writing or not cuz I don't know the graphic novels well enough, but it did
I
feel
just
like
don't
her
remember.
character in particular was never talking about anything other than like how she kind of felt about the way that the men in her life behave.
Yeah,
And I guess like that's the weird thing where like I almost wanted more of Carla Gugino's character because she felt more like a real woman. And maybe that's like more a testament to her as a performer because she also didn't get a lot of.
Yeah,
I mean, like she at least
the
got
female
to.
characters are definitely that's some of the
They're
biggest,
hurting.
and that's in all of Snyder's filmography. For going
Yeah,
there, but like it's tough. It's tough to watch. Either getting slapped around or raped or
or like
it's
just out here like looking to get pleased in some
yeah.
way.
So that's not great. But
But like, is that character more developed in the graphic novels,
I don't.
or
It's
is
been
it
so
kind of
long since I read it. I can't honestly answer. I've read it twice though. But yeah, that's not. Those aren't the characters that do stand out. So maybe they aren't even more developed in the graphic
yeah,
novels. But I think an actor could have brought. We talk about that all the time. Like even if it's not on the page, a good actor would
yeah?
be able to bring that. So like that switch of Dr. Manhattan being like, I believe in humanity again. The performance from her is not giving that. It's like it's
I
almost
also
like
feel like the CG was like it's better than I remembered it in real time, but I also feel like it interferes with his performance too. Like not being able to see his actual eyes takes
I
away a
like
lot of
that
what
though.
he
I
can
don't
do with his
know. Like I
eyes.
like how they're just like these white like
Yeah.
almost
It looks cool.
you
It
can't
for
get a
sure
read
looked
on him
cool.
almost, like it's almost like
Yes.
a blank slate. Like for him I think that works. Like you can't have two of those characters. Like she's a blank slate and he's a blank slate. And it's like you can't yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's hard. I just feel like I that's what I love about the sequence is that you can see all of Billy Crudup, so you can get all the pieces of his work. And when he's like kind of covered in blue and glowing, the texture of his like skin, and even though they refer to his facial tics and the ability that he's still making human, like he still has human emotion he's
yeah.
portraying, I do feel like the CG kind of stunts that a little bit.
Okay, that's fair. I'm like I said, I think it holds up pretty good still. I've
Looks better
definitely
than I
I
remembered for
do
sure.
remember people complaining about that too though, like he's too blue or whatever. Like, and I'm just like, you guys fucking watch two Avatar movies, 6 hours of blue people. Like, get over it.
Yeah, you can't have it both ways, you guys.
I do like the part though too where like he shows up randomly to that broadcast and they're like, You're never gonna work with the lights, you're too blue," and then he just turns the shade down and it's like, bruh,
Yes.
that was awesome. I,
Yeah.
I did want to so that was like a lot of the negatives I would say that I had. I would say the last ones would be the music choices in some instances are like
Sometimes they were cool,
pretty
but
weird. Like
a little all over
Alleluia
the place.
when Silk Spectre and Night Owl fuck for the first time was like,
I don't know
what
what
are
to
we
do with
doing?
that. I really don't know what to do with that. Especially because like we had
Oh, it makes me
yeah, I
laugh
don't
every
know.
time. It's just like I know you're trying to make
It's
this as
absurd.
like a very like celebratory moment, but like you said, it's absurd. Like, why
It's
would you pick that
yeah.
song?
Well, especially because we had already I guess like maybe the only thing I can think of is it's supposed to be transcendent because like the night owl has no game. Like she
Yeah,
tries to hit on him initially and he like really
he
can't get
can't get it
there.
up. He can't. Yeah, it's
So we I guess like it's sort of like, wow, he's really gotten it up because he's ready to pump when
oh
they
my
finally get down
god.
to it on the ship.
I
But
saw
I
a lot
guess
of
like,
letterbox reviews too commenting on Patrick Wilson's ass. Like, and
let's
so
go, P Wills.
if you're
Let's
if
go.
you're into that, you might want to watch this
Dude,
movie because a lot of people
pudgy Patrick Wilson is so funny.
the I just watched Air. I don't know if you saw that from last year.
Yeah, the
That,
Matt Damon movie, right?
and
And
that
Ben
was the
Affleck?
only comparison of like he's like low rent Matt Damon, like
He
Patrick, and I mean that
is.
as a compliment. Like Matt
Yeah.
Damon is too famous for Night Owl, but like
Yes.
Patrick Wilson is who you cast to be Night
Yep.
Owl.
Such a good actor,
Yeah.
such a good performer. Like he really is selling the fact that he's pudgy and they have to shoot around
Hmm.
it to make it
Yeah.
look like it's actually
Yeah, when she's
happening,
like
which is
unbuttoning
really
his
fun.
pants and you just see like his belly like hanging over.
So good. So good. Yeah,
uh
I guess like even there I feel like there was a kind of lack of depth. You know, we
yeah.
get some depth from Rorschach because we're hearing his inner monologue and we
Yeah.
get a kind of depth in sort of the scene, how the scene is set with that amazing opening montage, but it's like we don't get what we get from Mr. Manhattan for the rest of the characters and I kind of
Yeah.
wanted it.
Well, and it's because those scenes are those montages, I did want to cover those. Like, those are the ones I revisit. The Dr. Manhattan montage we covered already. The opening montage, the times are a changing
So good.
montage, great.
Perfect song.
that's the song choice to pick for that sequence. You
Yep.
get all the history of the heroes, like, that they've been around for decades, and like, seeing the evolution of them, how there's this dark underbelly to them. You get
Yep.
like, the lesbian superhero that dies, and there's like that
Baller.
as a hate crime, and all these other things, and like they get into that in the show too.
Yeah.
The other sequence I really like is what's the other montage that's really good? I'm missing one. Doctor Manhattan. Times are changing. Does Rorschach have one?
He has memories. He mostly just
Yeah.
has memories. And the same with Lori. Like, I guess we do get a little something in terms of like her backstory, but it's like she's basically boiled down to the fact that like her whole identity is about how she was created, like who her father is, or like what her parents' situation was like. So we don't get any information about like what it was like, what her life is like outside of her family dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, those are like the standout like kind of sequences that, when people post about this movie, I'm like, yeah, it's hard to argue. Like there's some really great montage work here that like
Snyder's aesthetic is like not really for me. I don't love how dark and slow it is, but I will say he is really thoughtful and detailed. Like
mm,
you can tell, especially in the opening action sequence, like the comedian's death, you can tell that he has thought about every single shot that he did, like really extensive storyboarding. And I do feel like I like that when I can see that coming across, like that it's thoughtful. That's when I can be on board. It's just that sometimes it's so dark that I can't really see the thoughtfulness, and then I
yeah.
feel disappointed. But yeah, I
I
think
think
it's
that's
hard
like
to
a tough
argue that
thing
he's
too,
not
because
talented, you
when you're
know?
talking about translating the graphic novel, like I think because his aesthetic is so like, I want to get this as cool and gritty as possible, like thinking 300 and
Yes.
guys kicking ass, and it's like the graphic novel is like actively being like, these guys are fucking dorks, and like,
Yeah.
they just have this power, but like we shouldn't look up to them, and we should, and I think that's like one problem of this, where it's like Snyder clearly thinks like, these guys are so
They're
badass.
awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, and then that's the way he shoots like the action, and it's cool. But I think that's part of like some of the problem too, of like the tonal, issues that we're having sometimes, where it's like he's shooting it from this like cool and idealized aesthetic, but
Mhm.
the source material is clearly being like,
Yeah, it
these
doesn't
guys
call for
are
that.
the real villains. Who watches the Watchmen? Like that's a
Yes.
huge theme in the graphic novel that I don't think kind of comes across, other than like you see it spray painted on the wall at one point. But it's like
Right.
that's like a huge question of the original, source material, and so that's like another thing that kind of people have bumped up against, which I think is fair. It's a fair critique, like
Yeah.
just because you're adapting the panels, you have to shoot them in motion, and the motion that you're doing is slow mo and like highly stylized, like you clearly think
Yeah,
these
shadow.
guys are great, and it's like, I don't know if that's how it should have been shot necessarily.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, it's like I'm
so
always saying, like I want the filmmaking to match the storytelling.
yeah.
And I do feel like sometimes the filmmaking works well with that, like at the top, but just like the story itself kind of starts to get squirrely at the end, I think the filmmaking also gets like lazy. I feel bad saying
Yeah.
that, but like by the end, it's kind of like he's not doing as many inserts. He's not doing as many moment to moment motions
Right.
through the scenes. It's just sort of like I feel like even he was like, "Ah, we're still making this."
Yeah. Like, it's cold, we're in Antarctica now, like, god, can we get this
How the
over
fuck
with?
did we get here? Yeah.
I think that's the other casting choice. I feel like they could have gotten somebody better for Ozymandias. I mean, in the show, it's Jeremy Irons. It's like that's the
Next
more
level.
that's more villain performance that I needed. Like,
Mhm.
scene chewing, and I maybe that is like them trying to be like, go against comic book type there, but he's
Yeah.
just, there's nothing there. It's the same problem with Silk Spectre. It's like it's too blank. There's
It's
nothing I can
too
read under the surface, where it's just like, I'm the smartest guy, and Yeah,
Right.
I set off the bombs 30 minutes ago, you know,
Yeah,
so
it's already over. It's
like,
already
which
done.
I like that. Like, I like that they're like going against the Bond thing. Like, why are you telling Bond your whole plan? Just shoot him, get it over with, you know,
Yep.
like, and so I like that he's like, oh yeah, it's done. You guys
Yeah,
can't
come on.
stop it. Like,
Well, I feel like I guess that's the hard part about this too is like trying to get everything all into the same story. Is that I feel like I like the choice of Jeremy Irons because I feel like a person like Osmandius who's so disillusioned in the writing should be older. Like the fact that he's a younger
yeah,
man makes him seem way more easily maniacal than someone like Jeremy Irons, where you're like, well, this guy's been alive a long time. Older people tend to not give a shit about other people. They lose the
yeah,
ability to care about people sometimes. And him being kind of young is sort of like he's just a sociopath. Like he too
yeah.
is just a sociopath. Okay.
It's tough.
And he's like the anti-Batman because like his parents are dead when he's a child and he goes the complete other way. And there's not much to say about that other than like he kind of seems like the 90s Batman's. It's like a smooth guy who's like, I'm out here doing good and
Yeah.
I've got these women around, got beautiful women who work for me.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, they are tackling an interesting like philosophical debate, I guess, like the trolley problem. You know,
Mm-hmm.
would you kill millions to save billions,
It's
or
a
you
real
know,
Thanos
yeah,
situation.
exactly. Thanos is another like comparison, I guess. But yeah, I agree with you though. Like that's, you know, the last 30, 45 minutes, it really kind of loses the steam that it built up with all the other, because I'm really kind of invested in all the characters up to that point.
Yeah,
Um
even the violence is very good and then it starts to really dwindle off towards the end as well.
yeah, like when they're fighting, it's just like I kind of don't know, like so Ozymandias is supposed to be the smartest person, but like what does he do
Also really
that's really,
fast
but yeah,
somehow.
exactly, like I couldn't get a hold of like what's his deal, you know, and then like the fighting at the end is like not the best stuff, you know, it's like,
Lots of wire work.
yeah, it's like we've already like you said, we've seen all the gore and like good violent stuff already up to that point, and it
Yep.
gets to the end, it's kind of just like, you know,
Yeah.
he already did it. You know, it's like what what are we
Yeah,
doing
it's
here?
been over and we all just have to like get out of here. And I guess I was confused about how the end works too because they're just like back at the old lair in Manhattan at the end and I'm like I thought Manhattan was destroyed. I don't how are they
Yeah,
just like back there? So I was confused. Like maybe they're in
yeah.
Jersey City and there was
I was
enough
gonna say
space.
maybe they're in a different part of New York. I don't, but I don't know. Yeah,
I
that's a good
can't
question.
I can't make sense of it just because since the big ending takes place like off screen essentially because we like don't really know what's happening until it's already happened. I think that like does make it more disjointed for me in the end too.
Mm. It's fair. It's fair. I we haven't talked about Jackie or Haley too. That's the one person I
He's
think
great.
we really have to touch on. He's like, aside from Billy Crudup as Doctor Manhattan, probably my other favorite part of this movie. He just
Yeah.
plays that, you know, with such dimension. You know, that's what I'm talking about. Where he doesn't just play it as like, you know, blabbering psychopath. It's like, you know, he gets serious when he wants to, and
Yeah, like the content aside, his ability to ground it and make it feel like
yeah.
a complex person
Because when he has
is
the
doing
mask
these
off,
things.
you know, you're seeing a lot under the eye, like when he's just holding the sign, he's like kind of reading the street, like you see him still working, you know, and
Yes.
like, and then like when they take off his mask and he's like, give me my face, like he has
So
like a lot of
good.
the best quotes in this movie, like, you're stuck in here with me.
Yes. Yes.
So he did a great job. Like he really is like no
He's
notes,
such a good actor.
10 out of 10 on playing Rorschach. The effect like of the shapes changing on his mask is like
I love
incredible.
that.
Like
Yep.
and like that's, I guess that's the other montage I was thinking of, like when they're interviewing him in the jail and he's kind of like flashing back all these memories, like
Yeah.
I guess that's like the montage for Rorschach, where it's like, you know, what do you see in this picture? And he's like, beautiful butterflies.
Yes.
Or whatever.
Yes.
And it's like this the darkest fucking memory. Like it's, oh Yeah,
I
we
mean,
get
and that stuff is really dark. Like the sequence
yeah.
of him going after the child killer and like
Woo!
showing the dogs eating a child's leg. I was like, shit, that is a
They really
little
go for
graphic,
broke on
dog.
the violence. They really go for broke on the like I said, and that's where it's like Snyder's like, "Oh yeah,
Exactly.
give me people getting torn apart," and it's like,
Let's
"All
go,
right,
making
dude,
a
all right."
meal.
But yeah, he's really good at that. Seeing, I love the social workers. Like, I can't help this guy. Like, just
Yeah.
just
When he like
put him in Gen Pop. I don't. There's nothing I can do here.
and then him being like everyone being like ready to want to attack him or whatever, and when he puts the fry oil on that guy,
Woo.
and then the jail like kind of goes crazy. I was a little confused as to like why one person dying would cause like a riot across the jail the way that it did. I got like confused
I
about
guess.
how.
Well, it made it seem the little person that he was, the way that he framed it was like, if he dies, there's gonna be a riot. Like, you killed one of us, or maybe like something like that.
Okay.
And so,
Okay.
like, when the way that they sequence that is like when like the monitor, EKGs like flatlines. That's
Yep.
when the riot happens. It's not like
Began.
right away. So I guess that's one way to do it. I don't
I
know.
mean, also jails in this world are probably like obviously like nothing is really managed appropriately. So I'm sure that jails, they're part of that as well. But I do love when he has to bust in on the social worker guy who's like trying to hide in his
Oh
office
yeah,
during this.
yeah.
Oh, and also those guys
Where's
trying
my
to get into his
purse?
cell. Yeah, like there's a lot of like really fun little moments that take place across this story too that are kind of silly, and especially with Rorschach's character, he gets to have the most dark comedy, I guess.
Yeah, it's if you it's the comedian comedy, where they always talk about like it's all one big
Yeah.
joke,
It's a
like
satire. Mhm.
yeah. And I really like him and Night Owl's partnership. Even
Yeah.
though like some of it's like just implied, like remember we used to do this or whatever, like back in the day.
Yep.
So again, we're looking at superheroes like past their prime, having to get back into it, which I like.
Totally.
It's not like all clean cut.
Yep, it's Skyfall.
Some of it is dorky looking, like Night Owl just as his character.
It's so
And like
dorky.
the ship is just like, oh man, it's not. I mean, I guess you could say like Batman too, but I don't know. It looks cool at least. But Night
Yeah.
Owl, I don't know if kids are dressing up as Night Owl for Halloween.
Most likely not. Yeah. Yeah, I guess like that's the interesting thing about all these characters is that they do feel kind of off-brand, and
Yeah.
that's important because I think like real superheroes would feel off-brand. And that's why I think Christopher Nolan did such an amazing job with Batman because he found a way to make it feel like maybe this guy could be real
Yeah, in
and
real
cool.
life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But in otherwise, I think they would seem like this. They would seem like some of them would be real squares who want to do something good, and some of them would be people trying to take power and do whatever they want, vigilante style,
Well, and setting it in the 80s too, I think has something to do with that too,
for
because
sure.
even the ones that are like from like the last generation look even dorkier, where it's like the guy with just like the rope around his neck and like
Ugh.
it's like, and they're all like wearing tights or whatever,
Yeah,
and
the like flying one, the butterfly one or whatever.
yeah.
Yep.
Oh, we didn't even talk about like the cancer like subplot. That shit was dark too. Like,
Yep. Yep.
setting up Dr. Manhattan. There's a lot of meat in
And
this
him being
story.
cool, being the scapegoat. Like, I thought it was interesting too for him to be like, "I kind of see your point, so I'm fine with you scapegoating me in this way."
Hmm.
Not necessarily being scapegoated for causing cancer because, like, low key, he wasn't doing that. But when Adrian was sort of like, "I just used your power against you to like do this, so they're gonna think it was you." It is kind of radical for him to be like, "Okay, yeah, I
And
don't
this
really
is
care."
again what he returns to in Batman v Superman, when society turns on Superman for being,
Yeah,
this figure.
for being
Um,
super.
Not as good. I mean, like, I just think of that jar of pee that was in that movie. Like,
Yeah, not
that
great.
sums up that movie pretty
So
much for
fucked
me.
up. Yeah, I felt like pretty angry in that movie. Like,
Yeah,
how could you do this
exactly.
to Superman?
I
But I think
know.
that's what's great
But
about The
Dr.
Watchmen.
Manhattan,
Exactly,
Fair,
is that
fair
he's sort of
game.
like, it's different
Swinging
because
his big dick everywhere. It's like, yeah,
I don't really care.
you
I'd
kind of
rather
were
you
being
guys
an
be afraid
asshole.
of
I
me.
also
Yeah.
really like that like introduction scene where like, and this is from the graphic novel I remember for sure, where like he's sleeping with Silk Spectre, whatever, but then
Okay.
he's like doing like six things at
He's
once,
also
like
working. He's Madam Web. He's fully
yeah.
Madam Web in it.
And they get to like this huge fight, and he's like, I'm here, I'm just I can't
Listen,
get
I
out
can
with my
do
work.
these things at
Yeah.
once. Yeah, I can do all these things at once. Yeah,
uh
that was an interesting thing because, like, I guess, like, again, that's like another thing that is disappointing just about the women in this story is that, like, she really only exists to be a sex object for the men that she's
yeah,
in scenes with, which is not fair to
true.
Malin Ackerman.
No.
Because she's pretty great in other movies. She definitely
Yeah.
shows up with
Definitely
things in other
comedies.
movies. Oh, for sure,
Definitely
for
comedy.
sure.
She's pretty
Um,
funny.
but it is interesting that, like, even the best of these men can't quite help but kind of want power. Like, even Night Owl, he's probably the most redeemable of all the men, and even he is most himself and feels most powerful after they break Rorschach out and, beat
And I
everybody
do
up.
like that, like, Night Owl's, like, the one, like, most well-adjusted out of the group, and, like, that,
Exactly.
we're saying this about her, like, but that it's not right away that they sleep together, like, he invites her to go for drinks for his
Yep.
weekly guys' night, and, like,
Yeah.
and, like, they kind of, they have conversations together, it's not just, like, and then she kind of, does the initiative of, like, kissing him and whatever too,
Yeah,
so,
they definitely
uh,
imply that in the end they are together romantically and treating
yeah.
each other as equals. So I do feel like, the best of them are able to go forward. It's just a total bummer of an ending, like you said,
Yeah,
it's a strange
very
melancholy ending.
bittersweet, and it
Mhm.
kind of leaves you like, I kinda wanted to get your opinion on that too, like, do you think, you know, because like, didn't Rorschach talk about, like, he knows that, Ozymandias is the villain in his journal? So, like,
Yeah.
the newspaper is gonna know, so, like, do you think the public knows the truth now?
I guess
That's
that's
the
the hard
question.
thing because, like, the public can immediately be murdered to forget it. It can be manipulated out of them,
True.
so I guess there's not too much hope there, but I like that there is that, like,
That
even a
open-ended
story like
question.
this, yeah, is sort of like, evil doesn't always prevail. Even if evil wins, a lot of the time, it doesn't always go unsighted. So I
Yeah,
appreciate, again, like, that very, very human grounding that this movie still aspires to, even though it's elevating so many things that are
yeah.
a little too out of human reach.
I will
Um,
say too, like one of my last like plot holes, like not even plot holes, but just things that um I noticed, and I don't know if it's because it's the 4K or not or
mm,
whatever, because 4K, the things that I've noticed that stand out the most as I'm watching this is like color, especially with like clothing and background.
mhm,
So this one doesn't have a lot of color, so honestly, that didn't really come across at all.
right.
But and then the other thing is skin texture and skin tones. And so when it got to like the old age makeup stuff, it looked horrible. Like
Did it?
it looked straight up trash. Like
It did look
I look
pretty bad.
okay, yeah. So that's what I was wondering too, because it's just yeah, Carla Gugino, especially Carla Gugino and Richard Nixon. Like it's just like horrible old age
Yeah, really,
makeup. Like
like,
this,
powdery and shiny somehow. I don't really know
yeah.
how. But
Um,
yeah, I guess, like, that's it. It's, like, at a weird time for effects, and all I can say is I know that whenever Carla Gugino gets to the age she was aged up to play, she's gonna look stunning. I know that.
yeah, better than that probably.
Mhm. I know that.
I also got like PTSD because I have. Did you watch the not Haunting of Hill House? What was the other one?
Shit. I haven't.
There's
I can't remember what it's called, but I do remember she was making those Mike
Bly Manor.
Flanagan.
Bly
Yeah, she
Manor.
was doing the Mike Flanagan things, and
Dude, that one
I
was so
gotta
bad.
find time for them. Was
And
it?
yeah, and
Okay.
Flanagan didn't do it. That's how you know it was bad. Like he did like
Okay.
one episode.
Okay, got it, got it.
But the way that they do it, it's like she's old, so it's still old age makeup. And then like it starts off as like one of my least favorite like storytelling devices where it's like, let me tell you a story about
Let
what
me take you
happened.
to a time.
And then that's the
Okay.
beginning, and then you get 9 hours of the show, and then at the end she's like, I hope I didn't bore you guys at this party. And I'm like, you were telling that story the whole time.
That was you? Okay, I don't feel as bad
It
because
was
I
it
do
was
want to
rough.
support Carla Gugino. I'm trying to see everything she's in for sure, and I love that she's a stan. I like that she shows up for Zack Snyder movies if he's making them. Like
And
at some
Flanagan. He's
point,
a
we should
Flanagan
maybe do
guy.
Sucker Punch
Flanagan
because
girl.
I do
I
like
did
Sucker
just pick that
Punch.
up on Blu-ray. I did, yeah.
Okay, we'll have to put a little time in between because we can't just be out here standing Snyder all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that she always picks directors and works with them, and she's like an actor with a capital A. So I of course wanted more.
300
But
is pretty good too. If we I would we could do 300
I might go
eventually.
back. I don't
That's
think
pretty good.
I've seen the whole thing. I think I didn't like the aesthetic, so I was like, next. But that's because it came out at a time in my life when I really wouldn't like
Yeah.
allow for anything I didn't like. I
It's the
would
same
watch
it's the
anything.
same thing though where like that's a graphic novel too, 300. And so
Oh, right.
he took that aesthetic from that shot for like panel for panel
And
too.
did that too.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
an interesting thing for us to know just about him as a filmmaker. But yeah, before we run out of time, tell me
Yeah.
what your favorite kill and stunts are.
There's so much for this category for this one. Like again, 3.5 hours, just crazy. I mean, even the animated sequences had some fucking brutal, out at
Yes.
sea, like there's a part where like his best friend, like the corpse of his best friend, he's so crazy, he like drags it along with him out at
Mm-hmm.
sea because he doesn't want to be alone. Like there's some dark, shit.
Dang.
Yeah.
All right.
For stunts, I said, I was between the opening fight scene with the comedian. I thought was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked how they did the cross cutting when the OG Night Owl was punching the gang members, and he was
Yes.
having the flashbacks of like his glory days. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yep.
But ultimately, for best stunt, I had to say Rorschach making his escape from his apartment, or attempted escape when he
Yep.
gets set up. I really like the desperation where he's like, fuck, no. And
Yes.
like,
Yes.
he
How could I have
knows
been so stupid?
he knows he's about to get set up. And so he like quickly grabs like the hairspray and the lighter, the
Yep.
matches. And then
Yep.
like you do that insert of the match, going across the floorboard and
Mm-hmm.
getting the SWAT guys, shooting one of the SWAT guys with his grappling gun. Like it's just a really cool
It's a good
stunt
sequence.
heavy sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Kill again. So many fucking choices in this movie.
Yep.
The guy who gets the grease thrown in his face. The guy who gets his arms cut off in the jail from his
Nasty.
own guys. They're like, "Sorry, man,
Sorry,
you're in the
man.
way." Like what?
Yep.
The pedo who gets his face demolished by the meat cleaver.
Yep.
Just
Deserves it.
so many crazy ones. I'm gonna say though, I'm gonna pivot and say a less gruesome one, but still, it's just like the one I think of when I think of Watchmen. Maybe the panel that sticks with me the most is when Dr. Manhattan dies. Turns into Dr. Manhattan, and so
Right.
like he's stuck in that lab. He's up
Yep.
against the glass. No one can do anything, and then you just see his skeleton. And the blue light coming out like that. It's
Yep.
if you just Google image that from the graphic novel, that's exactly how it looks. So
Amazing. Okay.
yeah. So
Yeah.
those are my two favorites. What about you?
Well, I think my favorite stunt is the shirtless guy on fire in the prison riot. You just don't
That was pretty
see
dope.
someone set
That was pretty
themselves on
dope.
fire without like a full suit, and it just
Yeah,
he
I
was
wonder how they did
walking
that.
through the shot. Yeah, I was like, damn, this guy is covered in jelly to try to protect his skin, and I feel like
Might
that
have been some fake
combination.
skin or
It
something
could
on
have
the
been.
back.
Yeah.
I don't
But I
know.
mean the combination of like practical and CG, I appreciate a lot in this film across the board, but
You're
I think
right though,
especially with a
because
stunt
usually
like
it is
that.
like the SWAT guys because they're in full
Yeah, they're
gear, so
protected.
they can get on fire. Yeah.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that dude just like lights himself on fire. Someone lights him on fire. It's like it's just like a throwaway stunt that I'm like, no, that
No,
is wild. I have to
I did
highlight it.
notice that too in Open, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And then I think for my favorite death, I like when Dr. Manhattan kills Rorschach because his blood on the snow looks like a Rorschach test.
Oh
And
yes,
so I
yes, it does.
love that.
What did you see? Because I saw a butterfly. I saw a butterfly
Ooh,
with
I'll
that.
have to go back and look again. I think I just geek
It was
out over
like
the fact
two like wings, and then like those. It had like two like I don't know what you call those, like the things that
antenna or something.
yeah that butterflies have. And so I was like,
Yeah.
I wonder if that's what they were going for. But that's what I saw. I don't know.
I
Someone else might have
mean,
seen.
that is one of the most popular images on those cards for
Yeah,
sure. I
true.
just think it's like it's a great way for his character to round out, to sort of be like always hard to predict and people always wanting to
Rorschach
make
never
an
die.
image, yeah, out of
Yeah.
what he's feeling and thinking, and then in his death that he is the image.
And then when the
Uh,
bomb goes off too, the social worker like crosses with the stand guy. Like I like how it's like all the guys meet with the
yep,
clock. It's like
yep,
everything is set in motion, and then like his suitcase goes undone, and all the Rorschach
yep.
tests fly in the wind. Yeah, really good Rorschach stuff in this for sure.
It's true. Yeah. I like that stuff for sure. And I think the part I always want to like this movie that I'll always come back to. I rewatch it
Just
every once in
YouTube
a
the
while
scenes
just
we
because the
talked
vibe.
about. That's what I do. Just
Exactly.
YouTube, Doctor
Yep.
Manhattan, Rorschach,
When you're
and
cleaning
times
your
are
house on a
changing.
Saturday, put it on in the background. You don't have to
Yeah.
pay attention, but you can call your attention to those moments.
Maybe Night
Because,
Owl
yeah,
doing those sweet pumps. That might be your
exactly.
favorite stunt.
You'll know
Who
when it's
knows?
time to turn and watch the TV. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hallelujah.
God, what a cover too. All right, cool. And I think that wraps it up for us. Anything else before we get out of here?
No, no, that's all I had.
All right, let's remind the people where they can find us.
Get your fix and follow the show at We Stay Buff on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and Twitch at The Buffs. Follow me at Misfit_Minded on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, Twitter at Rampage_Misfit, and my website at MisfitMinded.com.
Take us for a ride and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and please leave a positive review. You can follow me on all the socials at It's Me, Shani B. And thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time for another edition of Movie Buff. Stay buff.